presentations and work of current faculty. We're going to begin with Professor Lee Raiford, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
I'm like, so I get to go
After that.
Okay, so I'm gonna do my best. What I'm presenting is based on an essay that I wrote for the catalog, and I'll talk a little bit about this, of a photographer named Latoya Ruby Frazier and her project Flint is Family in 3 acts. The presentation, I actually presented a version of it in November at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. MoMA does what they call study days in advance of an exhibition for an artist, where they bring together scholars, curators, writers to help think about how to frame that artist's work in advance of an exhibition. So Latoya is going to have a show, I think in either late 2024 or in 2025. And so they brought a number, so it was a full day of speakers. And so I was the first panelist and the panel was called Black Feminist World Building. And that had been a lot of the ways that I'd been thinking about Latoya's work. So I also just want to apologize in advance. Professor Taylor asked me to do this less than 24 hours ago, so there's not really much in the way of images, so maybe whatever, you'll have to Google on your phone. And I just, really had to thank, all the people, but I also want to include my thanks that I offered to Latoya for giving me the honor to write about her work. As Amber Hassan and Shape Cobb, Flint poets and protagonists of Flint is Family, write, some angels come with cameras and compassion for the masses, and to meet one is to see how people are good, as is the creator, same thing really. And so that just kind of gives you a sense of who Latoya Ruby Frazier is and her model of care and solidarity that she practices through photography. So the invitation from Latoya Ruby Frazier to contribute an essay to her Steidel Gordon Parks Foundation volume, Flint is Family in 3 acts, arrived in early 2020 pre-pandemic, but the heart of the writing took place that summer. What wasn't burning was drowning, what wasn't dying was suffering, what wasn't already broken was crumbling. And we were trying to think through in the department, like what is the world? What world do we build after the world has ended? So Black Feminist World Building turns our attention to what is possible. It is a practice, a choreography, a survival skill that emerges from the recognition that the world we inhabit is, for so many of us, always in a state of ending, of ongoing catastrophe. Walter Benjamin asserted plainly, quote, that the tradition of the oppressed teaches us that the state of emergency in which we live is not the exception but the rule, end quote. Thus, in order to make this world livable, not only for Black female and femme subjects, but for all those dispossessed and rendered disposable by racial capitalism, human and non-human alike, we must refuse what Ruthie Gilmore names the state-sanctioned extra-legal production and exploitation of group differentiated vulnerability to premature death, or what Christina Sharp identifies as imminent death made quotidian. For those subjected to these forms of racism and death, rather than fall, we necessarily turn our attention to the equally quotidian labors of creating the conditions we need to survive, and more, of experimenting with living otherwise. Black Feminist World Building and Futurity, as Tina Campton tones, is an attachment to a belief in what should be true, living the future now. Black Feminist World Building, as abolitionist Mariama Kaba verse, begins, quote, not with the question, what do we have now and how can we make it better, Instead, let's ask what can we imagine for ourselves and the world. And Black feminist world building manifests perhaps most clearly in Linda Good Bryan's invocation that opens the revelatory just above Midtown exhibition on the third floor of MoMA. It opens with, on the wall, her quote that says, "Let's just do it ourselves." Indeed, this is a beautiful, necessary show. It is a document of Black feminist world building. It is a manual for museum work and for living. So what do we build after the world has ended? And how might Black feminism be a plumb line directing us toward new modes of world building? So those were the questions that were on my mind, that stay on my mind as I sat and worked with Flint's family. So I found myself returning to this photograph from Act 2 of Fraser's Flint is Family series. As I wrote in my essay, I want to describe this photograph as a monument. At its center, a Black girl sits confidently atop a horse, flanked on either side by a Black woman, her mother, and an older Black man, the girl's maternal grandfather, who are also on horseback just slightly behind her. Everything in this low-angle image informs us of the girl's indomitable presence and of her control, at once unassuming and wielded with ease. Her lived-in cornrow braids, the bright star in her t-shirt, her direct but gentle look at the camera, and perhaps especially the hand on her hip, that quintessential gesture of Black girlhood, young women irreverently and assuredly asserting themselves against what Du Bois once described as a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. All power and direction seems to flow outward from the girl at the center of the image. Even the horses take direction and look straight into the camera. Even the trees seem to rise from her back like a throne. There is no question the girl is our cynosure and our beacon. LaToya Ruby Fraser made the photograph Zion, her mother Shay, and her grandfather, Mr. Doug Smiley, riding on their Tennessee walking horses, mares PT's Miss One of a Kind, Dolly Secretly, and Blue's Royal Threat, Newton, Mississippi. LaToya is very adamant about like long, specific descriptions, right? Because these are all documents and gestures to the future. She made this specifically for the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art exhibition of Flint is Family Act 2, one of 3 acts that make up Fraser's narration of and direct intervention into the ongoing Flint water crisis. Fraser's series visualizes the cascading impact of this human-made environmental disaster on the life of her protagonist, Shay Cobb, a Black mother, daughter, artist, activist, and lifelong Flint resident. I have the video where you can see all the other images, but that would be a technological chaos that it would be a fault of my own, so I'm not, you can find yourself. But so Flint is Family Act 1, 2016-17, began as a commission for Elle magazine. Inspired by the work of Gordon Parks, who powerfully chronicles structural inequality through the stories of individual actors, Fraser's camera brings into focus Cobb's struggle in Flint, living with and protesting poisoned water, protecting her family from it. Fraser centers the experiences of a young Black woman, someone who, as Fraser put it, was silenced and looked over. When LaToya met Shay Cobb in 2016, Shay was doing her best to navigate the stress, illness, and chaos the Flint water crisis was exacting on her family and community. Fraser portrays the story of durational violence, environmental catastrophe, and the neglect and expendability of Black and working people under racial capitalism, not as sensational, but as the everyday occurrence that it is. If Flint is Family Act 1 is about the search for justice in the face of community emergency, then Acts 2 and 3 recognize that justice is too small a horizon, always receding, and should it arrive, never enough. In Flint is Family Act 2, 2017-19, LaToya follows Shay and Shay's daughter Zion when they leave Flint for fresh water and less stressful, but no less rigorous day-to-day living on Shay's father's farm in Mississippi. LaToya returns to Flint for Act 3 to document the arrival of the atmospheric water generator, a device that extracts water from humid air to produce potable water. The transport, setup, and operational costs of the machine for Flint residents were financed through the sale of LaToya's artwork and a matching grant from the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation. Although Fraser's images throughout Flint is Family are the product of the artist's incisive eye and technical precision, The work is at heart a series of collaborations with Shay and her family, with the community of Flint, and also with the writers, gallerists, curators, and variously located audiences whom Fraser enlisted and continues to enlist as part of the ongoing struggle for clean water in Flint. And Flint, of course, is the former home of what was once the largest and richest corporation in the world. As collaborations, they alert us that each act is not merely a unit of division, but that each part chronicles a series of actions as well as an ever wider and deeper set of relationships as an act of Black feminist world building. So I want to call this photograph a monument, but can a photograph even be a monument? And I am uncertain if that is the appropriate word for a single image, no matter how grand, in an ongoing project that documents an unresolved crisis. Can a photograph function as a monument when it is unclear what is to be commemorated or memorialized? Indeed, what form does a monument take in the wake, that is, in the aftermath and in the midst of unfolding an unfinished catastrophe? What struck me so deeply is the intentionality of LaToya's practice. No accidental photographs. LaToya wants us to behold Black working class life in its entirety, and for her images and her words to subvert what we think we know about Black people and their images. So too does she use the event of her photographs to enact ruptures and moments of solidarity in order to combat the institutional racism of museums that profit financially and culturally from Black images while ensuring that structural inequality remains in place. So LaToya always works on contract stipulations that provide airfare and accommodations for the series protagonists to attend exhibition openings, that build out attendant programming to feature performances by Shay and Amber's sister tour, and that call on museums to address the precarity at their own doorsteps. Shay and Amber intoned SF MoMA to provide access to the houseless population of downtown San Francisco. And these are each ways that Fraser mobilizes museums to function as spaces of community care rather than cultural extraction. Following Gordon Parks, Fraser has called the camera her own weapon of choice. And it is certainly that. But in the longer arc of her work, Fraser reminds us that photography is not only an apparatus of violence. In Fraser's hands, the camera is also a garden tool, one that gathers us together in community, into family, into mutual regard. In genre terms, Flint is Family functions as, I think I have a couple more pictures here. This is Flint is from Act 3, and this is another image from Act 2. So in genre terms, Flint is Family functions at once as a social documentary intervention in the space of the popular press that documents and indicts a system of structural oppression. It functions as a family album, a collaborative storytelling effort that produces the relations it seeks to represent. And it is a portrait series invested in guaranteeing ennobling portraits of individuals and communities. Fraser binds these three photographic forms, often imagined as distinctly public versus private, political versus personal, through a commitment to care. Care and mutual aid, creativity and solidarity, insisting Black life into the wake, tending to family, the land, and all the living creatures that occupy it, are the guiding themes of Acts 2 and 3, which are, of course, also the guiding theme of Act 1, and the guiding theme of LaToya's practice writ large. These are not the frames of crisis, chaos, and precarity through which mainstream news media generally likes to tell the stories of Black lives. Nonetheless, for LaToya, these photographs of Black and working class folks making a way on their own terms, of resilience in the face of dispossession, indeed the counter-narrative that underscores all of her work, are inextricable from Flint is Family. I'll go back to the color version. And so Zion on her Tennessee walking horse, PT's Miss One of a Kind. So Fraser made the image specifically for the exhibition of Flint is Family in the group show Soft Power, curated by Unjuju at SF MoMA. Fraser herself describes the image as epic. I don't have the dimensions here, but it is about the size of this wall. It is a rejoinder to J.E.B. Stuart, deposed in Richmond, Virginia in 2021, to Teddy Roosevelt, deposed at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City in 2022, and all the rest carved in stone and towering over racial others. Fraser has offered us an image to replace all those dead white men on horseback, Confederates, colonialists, imperialists, who have populated our mental and material landscapes for more than a century. Fraser's photograph suggests itself as a kind of monument, which Paul Farber defines as a statement of power and presence in public. So I want to call this photograph a monument because it puts a beautiful and ordinary black girl on a horse, her legs spread wide, shamelessly, powerfully, fully taking up space, and forces us all to look up at her in wonder and admiration. But at the same time, Fraser's photograph refuses monumentality. That is, a forced permanence, an imposition of aesthetic expressions of respect for the established order, and a means of historical erasure. If we believed in linear time, narrative closure, or triumphant endings, we would look at this photograph and breathe a sigh of relief for Shay and Zion's escape from the poisoned city. And we could avoid thinking about the fact that even as we sit here, Flint does not still have clean water, or that the poison that Shay and Zion and Shay's mother and all the residents of Flint ingested and bathed in has taken residence in their bodies, is carried with them in ways a camera cannot always or easily make visible. If we believed that photography was the product of a single author with a singular vision, singly directing her subjects to perform for her camera, we might marvel at LaToya's precision in framing the three generations so monumentally. We would praise how Fraser has given voice to Shay, Zion, and the black working class girls and women they were meant to stand in for. How LaToya's discerning eye plucked them from obscurity and made them a photographic subject. We would miss that LaToya's listening ear, her willingness to be part of the chorus, is central to her practice, as if personhood were a gift the camera could bestow, rather than a given that the camera and its operator merely illuminate and amplify. But if we believe that monuments and photographs are living documents rather than trophy cases, if we think of the images as a finding aid rather than a terminus, then we can understand the photograph of Zion as an asterisk, not a period. Not as declaration, but instead a reminder and an invitation to build a new world together. Zion on horseback moving toward us, leading her elders into a future beyond the gallery walls. I'm speaking to Zion, Fraser says of this photograph. If she ever gets lost, ever stumbles, she can open up that family album or the book and remember that this is her future.
Wow. That was beautiful, Lee.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know how this works.
Okay, I'm gonna try.
Okay.
I'll swap, okay.
There we go.
Okay, let me try to get the PowerPoint. You know what I'm doing. Try to find it.
PowerPoint.
Oh my
What's
gosh.
the title of it?
No. I'm doing it. I'll take the iPhone.
Is she safe?
I mean, she's safe, I guess. They're locked in their offices,
so
but
let's
this is
go.
fucking crazy.
Oh, here it
Like
is.
the
I'm sorry,
place is
sorry,
like, it's like 2 buildings away, and he's on the
sorry.
loose.
Okay, here we go, okay.
How long has this been going on?
And so, let me see.
30 minutes.
Here. I just wanna show that.
Seems like it's on.
America, baby.
Right.
Stressful.
If you go to the,
Oh no, I'm lying.
yeah,
It's
but also
not.
if you go to the next
We're
one.
in the midst
Oh, yeah.
of this game.
It's just like so terrifying.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank my colleague Lee Rayford for stepping
Yes.
in. Quite incredible and beautiful. As you guys know, normally we would have had our Clark Scholars panel, but COVID captured them. And so therefore, Lee and I have stepped in to present some of our work that we have given elsewhere this year. And so I want to make sure I don't talk too long. This is a piece that I gave at Cal State University Northridge on April 6th. And so I will just begin. Let's see. All right. So today I will share with you snapshots into the making of Frances M. Beale's Black Feminist House. A house that she describes as being built by hindsight bricks. Moments where she questioned, critiqued, or became angry about racism and gender oppression. The scenes are from a larger book project that explores how Beale became both a feminist and a radical, and why understanding her intellectual and political evolution is important for 21st century activists. Interpreting the life of a living subject can be filled with what I call formal intimacies, intellectual and emotional entanglements that require an innovative approach. My course of action is grounded in interdisciplinary methods, and overall can be defined as an oral memoir. In the traditions of autobiography and griot storytelling, yet stretching beyond these narrative forms with interpretive analysis, I am combining 6 years of Beale's interviews with archival documents and secondary literature to bring to the fore a fantastic life that continues to be lived. Born in 1940 to a non-religious Jewish mother and an African-American father, Beale always felt alienated from everyone outside of her nuclear family. In fact, Black girlhood existed in upstate Johnson City, New York, because she lived there. It was in this small town that her radical parents were isolated as a political menace during the beginning of the Cold War. Beale felt the sting of every newspaper article that detailed their connection to the Communist Party, and every racial epithet that marked her as other. As their only daughter, her coming-of-age experiences at times were different from her three brothers because of the normative ideas of femininity. We begin in 1948, Johnson City, New York. Like most kids, I felt free during outdoor play, but one of my first lessons about what girls shouldn't do took place in the front yard of my grandmother's house. During the 1940s and 50s, girls only wore dresses. I was climbing a big maple tree and my Aunt Gert yelled at me, "Get out of that tree, I can see your panties." Showing my panties, even during innocent play, at least in Aunt Gert's thinking, was unladylike, and she was determined to make me into a respectable Black girl. I objected to these fences that were put around me. I felt the contradictions and occasionally ignored them, but my Aunt Gert had her own strong will. Brick number 1. Historian Lindsay Jones reminds us that a pedagogy of play raises persistent questions about who has the power to determine what counts as girlish pleasures. In the case of Fran, it was her Aunt Gert, who was watchful and redirected Fran because of the exposure of her panties. But why should a Black girl have to worry about possible eyes upon her covered bottom? What could the image be mistaken for, and how might it hinder the possibilities of a Black girlhood? Aunt Gert's critical gaze and words aimed to protect Fran and counter potential harm directly linked to stereotypes that haunt Black feminine bodies in a racist patriarchal culture. Yet Fran recognized the inconsistency. Her three brothers were able to climb trees freely. Limited by notions of vulnerability, it was disturbing to Fran that her childhood play required regulation and discipline. 1950, Johnson City, New York. It was on a makeshift baseball diamond that I had my worst fight. It was after supper and on a lot near our house. My brother Raymond left the house before me, and when I arrived, I saw him surrounded by all of these kids. He was 13 years old, and there was a white girl berating him with all kinds of racial epithets, calling him a monkey, an ape, a nigger that should go to the jungle, and she was poking him in his chest. Immediately, I recognized her as Marianne, a girl in Raymond's class, and he was just standing there because of my father's edicts: boys don't hit girls. My brothers were not allowed to hit me, and I never saw my parents get into any kind of physical altercation. Without hesitation, I weighed in and started to poke and hit her. It didn't take long before she turned on me. She was 13 years old and getting the best of me, beating my ass badly. My 10-year-old arms were flailing around, and fortunately for me, my hand got hold of her shirt and it started to rip. She stopped hitting me and crossed her arms to cover her itty-bitty titties she was beginning to grow. I quickly saw a strategy before me. I stopped trying to hit her and went for the shirt, tearing it off while she was trying to cover herself up. And then she started to run home. I picked up stones and threw them at her. I ran home with Raymond and burst into tears, telling my mother what had happened. Shortly thereafter, the phone rings and it's Marianne's mother. She complained like hell and called me a little savage because of what I had done. I recall my mother saying, quote, "If your child will learn to behave and not use those type of words, then these things won't happen. So teach your child to behave." My mother accepted no blame. When we were in this kind of situation, she didn't say, "Well, you're right, my kid shouldn't fight." Although against violence, she believed in self-defense and said it was their fault for starting it. This fight was another example to me that my mother would back us up in these incidents. Also, this fight exposed me to the dangers of a crowd. Kids were hooting and hollering and egging Marianne on when she was winning against my brother. And as soon as I started winning against her, they turned like a chameleon and were saying, "Go, go, 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 go," like I was a leader of the mob. I felt uncomfortable about this because I was aware of lynchings and mob rule by the Nazis. Brick number 2. Fran recalled that boys shouldn't hit girls, but she was clear that a girl could hit another girl when that said girl was a racist bully. At the beginning of the fight, Fran was losing in the face of a superior force. It took exploiting an unscripted opening, the exposure of a developing female body, to survive the beatdown. Fran witnessed Marianne recoil and run away out of bodily shame. Visible 13-year-old breasts, and later on, Fran's so-called chubby body were deemed unseemly and examples of out-of-control flesh. Fran also recounted how the mob instigated the violence and quickly shifted loyalty. It frightened her, as it should have. She came to play baseball, not to physically fight. The actions of Marianne ignited the battleground. Yet in the view of Marianne's mother, she was the victim of a little savage. Fran's mother, however, placed the onus back on Marianne and critiqued another mother for her lack of mothering. Self-defense reversed the violence, but culminated in Fran's flowing tears. Fighting back against hegemonic culture can be traumatic and painful. Fran learned early on that bumping and bruising were sometimes unavoidable, even emotionally wrenching. Queens, New York, 1955. Oh, okay, thank you. Another family friend that I spent time with outside of Another family friend that I spent time with outside of babysitting was Bertha Hartman, who had 3 boys. She was shocked that we didn't know anything about Jewish culture. I was around 15 and went out back to shoot basketballs with her 14-year-old. I was much better with him, and he told his mother I had won. Bertha said something along these lines, that I should have let him win because he was a boy. I recall being pissed off about it, and I told my mother, who said, "Don't listen to her because she was stupid." This was supposed to be a communist party, but stereotypical gender roles were everywhere, and they weren't supposed to exist in those communities. Even though my mother didn't talk much in terms of women's liberation, she behaved it. My brothers were supposed to take care of their bedrooms, and we shared other chores like running the vacuum and cleaning the kitchen. Brick number 3. Fran refused to play into gender game of letting the boy win because of their ego. Stupid was the word that her mother used to deflate Bertha. Stupid in that she doesn't understand. Stupid as in unreasoned thinking. Stupid as in senseless. Stupid as in empty-headed. Stupid as in dumb. The power and imagery of one word can go a long way in capturing a moment in time. Her mother's homespun feminism was largely rooted in practice, but occasionally she would speak an empowering word to her only daughter, which forged a feminist brick. Queens, New York, 1957. My senior year in high school, Jimmy and I were going steady. I knew we needed more protection. We used a lot of condoms because I left it up to Jimmy against becoming pregnant. We were screwing like rabbits. Before Jimmy, I only knew about the missionary position. He taught me a whole lot more about sex. One weekend we never left my attic bedroom. Sex and water were all I remember. I went to the Margaret Sanger Clinic because I heard it was semi-private and that you could get birth control there with no questions asked. I got a diaphragm, but I didn't use it 100% of the time. I was caught off guard when I missed my period and realized I was pregnant. Jimmy was very supportive and nice, and we agreed I was too young to have a baby as I was preparing for college. We were not ready to be parents. Jimmy took over and found someone to give me a backstreet abortion. It was 1957, I was 17 years old, and it was stereotypical, in Harlem on top of a kitchen table. A black woman stuck a tube in me and gave me the medical instruction. If you start bleeding heavily, go to the hospital. Afterward, Jimmy took me back to his apartment in the Bronx. Later, we went dancing and I started feeling bad. We went back to the apartment and I was bleeding all over the place. When it didn't stop, Jimmy took me to the hospital in the Bronx. The nurse kept asking me, "What did you do? What did you do?" I replied, "I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything." I was afraid and told Jimmy, "You gotta get me a ring so they think we're married." The staff continued to batter me with the same question. "What did you do? You better tell us." I was crying on the table and a nurse said to me, "Easier going up than coming down." I don't recall all the details after that because I almost died. I was taken to a hospital ward with older women. The conversation in the room was filled with raw sexual talk. I heard one woman flirting with the doctor say, "Hey baby, oh that feels good." I have to say this was not my class background and I was terrified. But all of these women had had abortions, some saying it was their third and fourth time. I felt ashamed that this had happened to me. At the same time, these women gave me a lot of comfort. I remember thinking, this stuff happens to women. I'm not the only one. Soon thereafter, a classmate, Cordelia, died after a botched backstreet abortion. I was struck by the sad news and immediately thought this could have been my fate. Her death had a profound effect on me, and I later learned when I studied the subject of reproduction rights that tens of thousands of women died each year from backstreet abortions. Brick number 4. When Fran and Jimmy agreed to move forward with an abortion, they entered into a realm of illegal activity. Her experience mirrors other desperate women. For example, one woman, Rhea Duncan, recalled her abortion experience during the 1950s in New York State by proclaiming, "Almost everything I know about abortions I learned from not being able to get one." As a married woman with a history of miscarriages, Rhea had had 3 faulty fetuses removed in the hospital by a procedure commonly known as a D&C abortion. She thought the question of legality didn't apply to her, but after she became sick and her gynecologist found no reason to remove the fetus, she had few choices. As the black poison seeped through her body, Rhea asked her father, who was a physician, why she couldn't receive an abortion. He told her, unless rape could be proved or a near certain death predicted for the mother, doctors who performed abortions in 1957 could lose their license, even go to jail. Rhea's father used her professional contacts and sent her to 2 other doctors, but their fear overcame friendships and both refused to perform the procedure. In desperation, Rhea considered an illegal abortion, but her father suggested she get a psychiatrist to diagnose that she was emotionally incapable of raising a child. The Roos won approval from a gynecologist for the abortion. Fran didn't have Rhea's resources. Rhea was an elite married woman, and her story helps to contextualize why so many women and girls were reduced to backstreet abortions. Usually performed by an unlicensed person, the procedure could be fatal if improperly done in unsanitary conditions. Fran shared that she almost died and her high school classmate Cordelia did. In addition to the health risk, along with the person who performed the procedure, one could be indicted for breaking the law. The surveillance of working class urban communities like Harlem resulted in the press reporting on clusters of abortions prosecutions in the 1950s. To proceed with an abortion, given that death and jail were ever present, speak to Fran and other women's unflinching resolve against having a child, for whatever reason. Madison, Wisconsin, 1958. The black population at the University of Madison was only a sprinkling here and there. It was shameful because at least there is Milwaukee and some big cities. Most of the black students were male athletes and scholarship recipients. There was one other black woman in my dorm, and she was the daughter of a doctor. We were never particularly close. She was the Jack and Jill Club type. I got invited to a meeting as a Negro student to help found the Delta sororities on campus. I met for the first time 4 or 5 other black women that I didn't even know were there. First of all, just getting ready for the meeting was a joke because I didn't have the appropriate attire. I knew I was expected to wear a black dress, a girdle, black heels, stockings, and pearls, and I didn't have most of those things. I remember Harriet Tasman going into her closet and pulling out this dress that I ended up wearing. Harriet was also in the Integrated Liberal Studies, and later I met her again in SNCC. We get to this meeting and I'm ultra left up the gazoo. I should have kept my mouth shut. I was already anti-Jack and Jill and cotillions, and now I'm anti-sororities. These were not things I was interested in. They ended up forming a chapter because they felt they ended up not forming a chapter because they felt they lacked a critical mass. At the time, I really didn't understand the role of black institutions and how important they were. I just saw this gathering as a mean group of people. Had I done my investigation, I would have learned that the Deltas were intellectuals. Later, when I was working for the National Council of Negro Women, the national president of the Deltas showed up to one of the board meetings wearing an afro and shared how she had been confronted at her sorority meeting. The Deltas asked her when she was going to stop wearing that afro, and she said, quote, "When it starts growing straight, I'll wear it straight." Brick number 5. Hair texture, attire, constricting undergarments were shackles for many black women. The time, effort, and money it took to look unlike oneself were factored into black women's decision to embrace aspects of the women's liberation movement. Although Fran doesn't recall the details of why she felt the Deltas were a mean group of people, she clearly didn't feel comfortable in their presence and attributed her leftist thinking to being at odds with middle-class organizations. Exploitive capitalism and racial discrimination were intertwined and the enemies to be fought against. Fran had little patience for any other kind of political conversation. Queens, New York, 1960. We had a lovely wedding reception in my mother's backyard. Mildred's father, who was a sergeant in the Army and a part-time caterer, provided a tasty feast. Many years had passed, but she never forgot that my mother refused to press charges against her daughter. My mother brought the food, and he wouldn't let her pay for the preparation or the service of it. He also let us cut down the bushes that separated our backyard lawns to enlarge the space. I remember his generosity. The tables and chairs were set up on Mildred's lawn. The garage was the dancing area, and our backyard was for commingling. Aunt Ida took lots of photos at the reception. Jimmy's family came all the way from New Jersey and attended as guests. One of the things that really bothered me at the reception was that my family handed Jimmy all of the wedding cash gifts because he was the man. Even my left family was stuck in gender norms that were discriminating against me. Brick number 6. Fran's work life began at the young age of 10. Her father had created a newspaper route for her and her brothers. He pounded home the importance of honorable work and saving one's money. As a teenager, Fran was a babysitter for progressive families and in college employed as an academic counselor and tutor. She took pride in living within her means and putting away cash for a rainy day. This money situation at the wedding reception and later on in their marriage was exceptionally hard for Fran because of their contrasting attitudes towards money. He was a spender and she had been taught to be a penny pincher. Scholars have analyzed how money can be manipulated and used as a vice grip tool to uphold patriarchal power. This money exchange made Fran mindful of financial dependency and how left families could also be committed to masculine notions of the head of the household. Paris, France, August 1960. The 6 to 7 day voyage to Paris from New York was our honeymoon. We played shuffleboard and enjoyed each other. Jimmy knew a whole lot more about sex, and we used his Karma Sutra book, which was a popular underground bestseller at the time, to guide us. We had sex everywhere, in the bathroom, in the bedroom, and at all times of the day. As he pulled me into his body, I became more uninhibited. We were young, and I really enjoyed making love with him. Break number 7. Fran consistently describes how she enjoyed sex. Although she had moments of guilt when she was sexually active and unmarried, she didn't deny herself the pleasure. It was, however, a secret joy that she shared only with her lovers and diary. A sisterly conversation about sex was stifled because her generation was saddled with the binary tag of virgin or whore. Not to mention the possibility of loving another woman. In tune with her body and the erotic feelings stoked with sexual intimacy, Fran bystepped the divide and said yes to herself. So I'll stop so Lee, there's Lee. Lee's coming back. And Najat, we thank you for holding the camera up for the entire period. And so, as we put closure on our symposium, we're gonna let Nikki just kind of moderate some questions.
Yes, so I'll start with a question, and then we can open up question, comment. But one of the things, just such beautiful work, and I'm impressed and in awe of my colleagues. And each of you talked about care and the care of the people that you are an interlocutor for, the work that they do. And I'm curious about how you think about bringing care into the process, into the research process, because in your presentations, in the writing, right, in the ways that both of you illuminate parts of their work and their lives, you take such great care in doing that. I see that. So the same kind of Black feminist approach you're writing about, right, you're also representing. So I'm wondering if you can just speak to that a bit, how you think about that in your work.
That's a good question, Nikki. Thank you. I think just going back to Patricia Hill Collins, right? Really those principles of a Black feminist practice and epistemology are just really about listening, the evidence of experience. All of those just seem more and more, the more I do this work, the more fundamental those feel. And so, really what it means to try and find the right word, right? To take time to find the right word, to really hear people and their, in what they think they're doing. So part of this was a lot of conversations, phone and email exchanges with the artist, and just also, I think I would say observing her too. So observing her at openings and how she's interacting. I think is and I think wanting to get the story or get the writing to be something that the person recognizes themselves in, right? Recognizes their story, is not, I think, maybe it was you, Nikki, who said it was and then you show up and everything is not the thing, right? And it's that's not what, so trying to kind of get the work to align in a particular kind of way, I think. I'm also hesitating because I think I've been thinking also about the problems of care a lot lately, and so trying to figure out, when does care lead to a hagiography? When does it become detrimental to everyone involved? But those I don't have right now. Those answers.
Yeah, that is a good question, Nikki. I think for me, because I knew Fran prior to us starting this project, I had cultivated a relationship with her over the years, and I also helped to facilitate other people interviewing her because they knew that we were friends. And so in that process, I could constantly hear her crafted answers to most everything. And I never thought about her as a research subject. I thought about her as a political friend. And I cared for her in that way. And so once we shifted, I tried to be even extra careful about how to engage her life story because I had heard her repeat continually certain kind of narratives that, how can I say it, were crafted in a way I think that she was giving them what she felt they wanted to hear, and she was also holding back some of her own self to protect herself. I'm not saying that she was engaging in the culture of dissemblance, but I am saying that she didn't feel she had to share all of herself with the people that she was engaging with. And fortunately for us, over the years, I think as she has gotten older, she just like, I'm just gonna say it, you know. So if you notice in a lot of the interviews, particularly Nikki, you know how you were talking about the film when she's beautiful when she's angry. Yeah, she's beautiful when she's angry. Fran only talks about the abortion of her friend Cordelia. She doesn't talk about her own. And I thought that she had only had one, the one that I just read about in New York, but she also had one in Paris. And so it wasn't until we began to engage over the years that she told me about that one. I was like, oh, I thought you only had one. She said, no, I actually had two. And so and she had an abortion in Paris when they were illegal there as well. And so I write about what that process was. And I wrote a sentence, something like, you know, swapping a Harlem kitchen table for a bed in a Paris bedroom still did not protect her from possible death around the procedure.
I'm Paul Lee, I'm a visiting scholar in this department and also blessed to be a mentor for the BSC. I want to apologize for being late. I had a physical therapy appointment. I came here because I wanted to hear the student presentations.
Sorry. Earlier.
Next year will be my 50th year of being a serious student of our history and culture. I started when I was 13 years old. And my experience in being an African American, especially an African American male, has made me cynical. And there are many people of my generation who don't see much hope for our people in this culture. But because of Lee and Tiana and Nikki and Eula, and also Barbara, giving me the opportunity to work with BSC students for the first time in my Black life, I have hope for the future. It's because of y'all. And I share an office with Professor Taylor, if there's anything that I can ever do, if only to cheerlead, please come and visit me. But I want to thank you for what I'm sorry I missed your presentation. I'm looking forward to see the videotape. But thank you for being the scholars that you are and the people that you are and for the contribution that you're making. It's going to be a better world because of what you're doing.
I think that's a wonderful way to put closure.
I just want to make one
yes.
quick comment that your particular presentation resonated so hard because of what's going on currently.
Yes.
So like
Yes,
it
yes.
is so timely to
Yes.
be kind of bringing up these older conversations and putting them in conversation what's going on politically today.
Yes.
It's frightening.
Yes, it is.
It's like really frightening to hear these stories, and the fact that we're like recreating this cycle again right now in 2023 is just mind-blowing.
It's interesting that you say that, Lindsay, because Fran and I have been working on this for many years, and over the time period, we've been trying to figure out how to pitch it. Because do we pitch it as, you know, a former member of SNCC, a former member of the Third World Women's Alliance, you know, a journalist, and who knew that fact that she had 2 illegal abortions where she almost died from them could be a way in which to expose other people on the possibilities of what this actually really means. And so now I've kind of reframed that aspect of it and her work around it. I've recentered that more because of the current political crisis that we're in right now.
There's a way that both of your presentations made me think about shame and who the shame belongs to.
Yes.
So that powerful image with young Black girls centered looking at us, it's like posing that question.
Yeah.
Right? And you are dealing with topics that in another context, right? I'm sure we're shrouded in shame, right? And kind of
Absolutely.
breaking that wide open.
Yes.
And asking the question, you know, who does the shame belong to really?
Yes. Exactly. And one of the things that Fran and I have talked about a lot you know, her generation, right? You know, the fact, you know, that she loved getting down, right? She loved sex. She created all kind of scenarios to have it, you know, where she would get off at one bus stop, he would get off at the other, you know, I mean, just all the different kinds of ways that young people manipulate to get some privacy. And I write about that. And, but one of the things that became so difficult for her was the fellow that she lost her virginity to before Jimmy came along. He was Catholic. And so, you know, she said, like, you know, they would do all these things to have sex, you know, in her attic while her mother was at work. And then on Saturday he would go to confession. And then on Sunday he was like, oh, we can't do it, you know. And then on Monday she said he was being all crazy, we can't do it. And then by Wednesday his you know, his hormones had kicked back in. And then on Thursday they were doing it. So she was like, it presented her so much confusion. She said because she was already feeling embarrassed and ashamed, and then to have to carry his shame, you know, magnified her own frustrations. But another aspect that I am kind of retooling in this piece is that what I love about Fran is that we don't have a lot of narratives of heterosexual women enjoying sex. It's always, not always, it's largely around trauma. It's largely around all the things that we normally think about when it comes to heterosexual sex. But Fran enjoyed it. And sometimes it's even embarrassing for me. You know, because she's very forthcoming with me. And at a certain point, I become more comfortable talking about it. And when her and Jimmy finally split up, you know, I said, were you guys still having sex? You know, because how sex can happen, you know, during the breakup, right? And some people talk about that as the most like pleasurable sex, right? Because it's so intense. And she said, yeah, she said, but soon, this is a direct quote, the dick lost its importance.
This is a direct quote. Thank you for clarifying.
Were you not taking it?
Exactly. So, you know, that is the sentence in the book.
now.
So she's, and you know, so she's like, definitely, that is another aspect that I'm really toying with and playing up. That she had a pleasurable sex life in the midst of growing up in an era where she's just writing it in her diaries, where, you know, she's having like pillow talk, right? But with no one else.
I was really struck too. I mean, like, also just a lot around the, you know, just general quest for bodily autonomy, and then because it's not just the, you know, the sort of the descriptions of sex and pleasure, but also like the description of the fight, right, is also really graphic and messy and physical, and so I was really just really struck by Fran's willingness to get into the kind of like a body messiness, right?
Yes.
Like, you know, all the like all of it.
Yes. Yes.
And that's really it's really impressive. And well, you said I was going to ask you like how you got, was it that she, you know, how you got her to elicit those stories, but it sounds like she's just telling you those stories and you are.
Well, I'm reaching in. So the good news about, you know, witnessing and reading other interviews is that you kind of know what the standard conversation has been. So I'm kind of like trying to like go in between the cracks of those conversations and ask her certain kinds of questions like, well, you know, who did you lose your virginity to, and where did it take place, and how did you create space for it, and what did it feel like? So I'm asking her those kinds of questions, and I think, but it took a while. I'm gonna say probably year 4.
Wow.
Year 4 of the interviewing process. So it didn't like happen year 1, year 2, right? By year 4, she's just like, you know.
And this is year 4 on top of like decades of friendship.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So yeah, but this part we have to stop,